Hey friends, welcome to the Addiction Unlimited podcast. I'm your coach, Angela Pugh. Hey, I wanted to do something different today. You guys know Addiction Unlimited turned 2 years old at the beginning of April, and all of our plans and our big celebrations were put on hold because of coronavirus. And one of the things I wanted to do was revisit some of our most popular episodes, our most listened to, most downloaded, favorite guests. And I didn't get to do it the way I wanted to, but I did want to revisit this because we've had some guests that are so freaking popular that people absolutely love. And I get so many great comments from you guys. So I wanted to go ahead and share probably our number one most downloaded episode. And it's been, a year or so since she was on the show. So I think it's a great time to bring it back and have a second listen. And that's what we're going to do today. This is definitely a time when we are all feeling on edge, right? We've been on quarantine for what feels like forever. I think we're all burnt out. I'm losing my mind, quite literally. And I've heard from you guys that you're feeling the same way. I think there's a lot of fear about the future. We don't really know what things are going to look like and how things are going to go and what's our economy going to be like. A lot of people are losing jobs. I mean, it is unprecedented, quite honestly. And I've been trying really hard to just be of service and stay in a service state of mind. But I'm going to be honest with you guys. I've really been affected these last couple of weeks. It's been really hard. And I've been talking pretty openly about that on my Facebook Lives and things like that. And it's really been a challenge. And I thought this would be a really good time to bring back. It is one of my favorite episodes also. It was one of my favorite recording experiences because I got to record with her in her home. She's such a lovely person. And I love a lot of things that she talks about and how she breaks it down in recognizing that she didn't want to drink anymore. She does not identify herself as an alcoholic. I don't even think she says that she's sober. I don't think she calls herself sober. She says sober-minded. And I love that too, right? Because it is a state of mind. This is a choice that we make. I make a choice on a daily basis to stay sober-minded. I don't want to be unhealthy. I don't want to be an instant gratification person anymore. I don't want to be out of control. I don't want a ton of drama in my life. And to live like that, I have to be sober-minded. And I love how she talks about things and how she breaks it down and how she realized that drinking just didn't agree with her. And she felt this sense of sort of being a fraud, right? Because she's healthy by day and over drinking at night. And it just didn't match for her in her identity and how she saw herself. And I think it's such a cool way to really understand quitting drinking isn't about labels. People get so hung up on what they're going to call themselves or not call themselves, or, not wanting to go to this meeting or that meeting. None of it matters, you guys. Like, if you can't drink, you can't drink. It doesn't matter what you call yourself, right? You hear me say this all the time. Those aren't the important details. So I'm going to bring back this episode of Jenn Kautsch, who I just enjoy so much. It was such a pleasure to record with her and meet her. And this is our number one most downloaded episode, Jenn Kautsch. Hey everybody, welcome to the Addiction Unlimited podcast, where you get to learn everything you want to know about addiction and recovery. I'm your host, Angela Pugh, co-founder of Kansas City Recovery, life coach, and recovering alcoholic. To learn more about me, you can listen to episode 0 on your podcast app or find us on the web at addictionunlimited.com. Hey everybody, welcome to the Addiction Unlimited podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Angela Pugh, your host. I think you guys are going to love this, especially this is a totally outside the box, different point of view, which I love. I love having that on the show. We have Jenn Kautsch today. We are recording in the beautiful Fort Worth, Texas. And Jenn is, I love this term that she uses, sober-minded. And we're going to learn more about that when Jenn starts telling us who she is and what she does. And she is from sobersis.com, and that's at sobersis on Instagram. And of course, we will have all that stuff in her show notes. Let's welcome Jenn to the pod. Hi, Jenn. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I also need to say that you were so lovely to open your home to us to record in your home. And you made me a wonderful mocktail, a virgin peach Bellini that is fantastic.
Awesome.
I love that.
Glad you're enjoying.
Yeah. And you mentioned something about mocktails and munchies. Is that what you called it?
Oh, yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, it's been really fun. It's something that I started just this spring. And I just wanted to show women that it's an option, that you can have a great girls' night out or a get together in a home without wine being the center focus, or even necessary, quite honestly. So
Sure.
I started Mocktails and Munchies, and it's been really fun. It's kind of grown over the months. There's always just a great handful of gals that come out, and different companies even have sponsored it with their products. And it's just what we do is just like girls. We get together, we talk, we laugh, we share stories about life, we have fun, and we experiment with mocktails. I mean, where else are you going to find a whole kitchen countertop of things that you just want to try once or a little dabble? So we have a lot of fun just experimenting and making connections and building real relationships.
I love that. How did you get into the whole mocktail trend?
Well, that's a good question. And it is kind of a trend. I do see a lot of people wanting to have a festive drink, a fun drink. You know, being sober or choosing an alcohol-free lifestyle used to get such a bad rap.
Mm-hmm.
It would seem so lame or so boring. And I think the trend is really heading now towards it becoming almost like there are mixologists out there. There are artisan crafters that are coming up with these amazing drinks. They don't even always, in fact, most of the time, mimic what alcohol tastes like. They mimic the feeling of the ritual, the beautiful glass, the feeling of glamour, the feeling that women, I think, drink for often.
And I think too, in the recovery community, some of those things can be an issue, right? Because it can create a situation that triggers me. And you and I were talking about this. I just talked about this on another episode not long ago, talking about how much of these alcohol-free spirits and things, are they actually mimicking the flavor? Because mimicking the flavor of an alcoholic drink for me would be a problem. A lot of times we talk about, in recovery, we talk about some of those rituals and that it can lead to a situation where we get triggered because it was so much of our lifestyle and we connect it to drinking. But I think at the same time, especially for those of us with long-term sobriety, right? Like for me to drink something out of a beautiful glass is not going to trigger me so much. It's going to make me really happy and smile because I get to have a pretty glass. And that's what I like.
Right.
So I don't know that it's problematic, but I know in the recovery community that is something that is talked about because we glamorize that drinking lifestyle.
Right.
And that's part of the problem in that addicted mind is glamorizing that lifestyle. And with that comes glamorizing those glasses and those nights out, so to speak. So it's a slippery slope, I think. But I love too that there is this whole spectrum of people that are making a conscious choice to live a sober life. And that's so big. Like you don't have to be a full-blown alcoholic to live an alcohol-free lifestyle. And exactly. I love that piece too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's kind of where I have found myself. You mentioned earlier the word sobriety spectrum. And I do think that there's a sobriety spectrum.
So I stole the sobriety spectrum from Chris Marshall. He's on the Sands Bar episode. But it's such a good term.
I love it. I love that I'm hearing that as well. I think that's true for me. My sobriety or choice to really live this alcohol-free lifestyle for me came primarily because I was exhausted from the tug of war in my mind. And that's why I talk a lot about sober-mindedness. So when I started drinking, I was a little bit later in life. I was in my 30s, actually. And at first it was fun, what signaled freedom and a joyous time could sometimes signal towards the end something that maybe it wouldn't be as fun. There may be a hangover, or I may just be in so much conflict in my mind. So for me, the exhaustion of trying to really moderate something that I felt was going against what I was doing by day. Now, let me see if this makes sense to you. Something that I've kind of come up with to describe it, because I'm a really healthy person. Right? Mm-hmm. I'm health conscious, or at least I try to be. I could be healthier, but I'm a very healthy person. And I feel like I'm mindful by day. Like I go to hot yoga. I drink green juice. I do all these things really mindfully, very sober-minded, right? During the day, and very intentional living. And then 5 o'clock would roll around. And I could have all the best intentions in the world in the morning and say, tonight I think I'm not going to drink my glass of wine while I'm cooking, or I'm going to a networking event. I'm going to skip it. What I would find is the willpower or the good intentions or the resolve would start to wane by we all know, the wine o'clock hour. And so by 5 o'clock, I found that all my intentions just went out the window. It was like I was right back to feeling a mix of emotions, a mix of mindset, like, I'm going to undo my workout today if I have a couple of glasses of wine. I know that's sugar. I know that it's getting harder to have just one. It's not the nature of the substance to open a bottle of wine and have a glass. And so I knew that I was working against almost my own mind. I felt so in conflict within myself. So externally, I would say I looked like most everybody. Mm-hmm. I would say internally, I was having a unique conflict that made me feel exhausted, sometimes alone and isolated, because I didn't necessarily fit down the spectrum and resonate I wasn't an alcoholic. I didn't feel like going to a meeting and grabbing a label for the way I was feeling was going to serve me in getting where I wanted to go. But I also didn't feel like there were a lot of people. For years, I felt kind of stuck because I felt like no one was really talking to this gray area drinker. Yeah. Which is kind of a new term as well. You've got sobriety spectrum and you've got gray area drinker, which I felt like I kind of fell in, where it was something that was in my life, but it was becoming too important in my life. I started to look forward to it more than I really wanted to. And I just felt in conflict. I felt in conflict as a Christian with my faith. Not because God says it's wrong to drink alcohol, but because I knew I was putting it oftentimes before Him. Right. If I wanted comfort for my anxiety, it was easier to pour a glass of wine than sit down and ask Him to give me what I knew only He could. And so I had that conflict. I had conflict with my health. Again, the yoga girl, green juice girl by day, and, drinking the wine in front of the TV at night. It just didn't match. And then as a mom, too, I felt in conflict.
And that is so many of those things you just said are things that we talk about, of course, in recovery. And a lot of those things are some of the beginning warning signs. Mm-hmm. But I think what people don't realize, and this is why I like that gray area drinker term too, because what people sometimes don't realize is there are a lot of stages of drinking and misusing alcohol and abusing alcohol. There are these stages before you get to an actual addictive, physically dependent stage. And I feel like that's kind of what you're talking about. And I think when you and I were talking on the phone last night, we talked a little bit about this too, where I feel like in 12-step, we would refer to that as a high bottom. I was a lower bottom, but that's kind of a high bottom drinking person. And the way you're describing it is like you have such an awareness of all of those warning signs, and to have that awareness and to catch yourself and to make a conscious choice to live differently, I think is incredible. And one of the things I kept thinking as you were describing it is words and actions, because we talk so much in recovery about my words need to match my actions. And that's what you're talking about in that conflict, healthy, conscious, aware of having a healthy lifestyle and treating your body well and feeding it well by day, and then doing this thing at night that kind of went totally against that.
Exactly. Yes, that put it in a nutshell right there. And I felt like I was living a divided life. I felt like I had a divided mind, and the tug of war was in my mind. So really, that's where my work began. So about, not a big day counter so much of how many days it's been since I haven't drank, because quite honestly, I really kind of still hold the choice and the option to drink what I want when I want. I have just found that my desires for alcohol have changed. So I feel the freedom, but I also feel like the mindful piece and the education piece, which was huge for me. I did not understand. I really just did not know. And that's one of my passions. And one of my things that I get really excited about is education, information. Women today, we are getting just an onslaught of mass media marketing heading our way. And a lot of it's misinformation. To sell the product. I mean, follow the money. The alcohol industry is the second largest advertising budget in the world behind automobiles. That's for a reason, because it works. Even if we don't want it to work, it's still working on our subconscious mind. So that's where I began to do so much unraveling, was with my belief system, because I honestly, Angela, I actually believed that alcohol allowed me to relax. I really thought that it would help me sleep better. I really thought that it would take away some of my stress and anxiety in those years where I'm raising teenagers and wanted to take the edge off. What I have come to find out through just looking at the facts, is alcohol has a huge negative effect on anxiety.
Yes, it does.
Oh my gosh, the connection between alcohol and anxiety is shocking.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that. I really just thought, it'll just kind of take the edge off. Well, it takes all the edges off is what it does, and actually chemically produces more stress hormones in our body. Knowing that, I could have a glass of wine and it would make me fall asleep, but it wouldn't keep me asleep, was eye-opening to me, like literally for years.
And it's not quality sleep.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I didn't sleep for years. I passed out.
Right. And then at 3 a.m. got your wake-up call that you didn't want to have.
It wasn't restful, healthy sleep. Yeah.
Exactly. And I hate that 3 a.m. wake-up call. Even if you've just had 2 or 3 glasses, it still can affect. And waking up and having that racing heart or that moment of dread, or feeling like, I did it again, is a horrible feeling.
I don't miss any of that.
Me neither.
I like that approach too, thinking about it in those terms. And I've talked a lot about, pretty openly about my struggles with food, right? Because as an addicted person, I can be addicted to anything. And really in the last 4 or 5 years, my food issue has come up, right? And I gained some weight and lose and gain. And
I understand.
I had to get to this place where mentally, where it was more about how I'm treating my body and what I'm feeding my body, not about what I look like, but how it makes me feel, because food hits all the same buttons in our brain that addiction does, right? And where my brain is miswired to make me vulnerable to being addicted is also the same wiring to have anxiety and depression and ADD, right? It's like the trifecta. So like really getting in that mindset of noticing how different foods would make me feel, and getting in that place of, gosh, I don't want to feel like that. I mean, yeah, sure, I would love to have some ice cream, but it kind of wrecks me for the rest of the day. Like I want to take a nap and then I get grumpy and short tempered. And like, I just don't have time for all that.
It's just not worth it. It's like you weigh it out, mindfully pausing, and you weigh it out. So
it's so much a more comfortable way to think about things too, though.
Well, and it takes away the deprivation mindset, the mindset that says, I want this, but I can't have it, versus, why do I want it? Let me use some tools one of my favorite tools is playing the movie forward. So if I do have that drink, if I do have that bowl of ice cream, let me fast forward and really be honest with myself and say, how will I feel later? And I can also play the movie forward and say, if I didn't have that glass of wine, if I played that movie forward, how will I feel later then? Like I've said this to my tribe, I've never woken up ever, like one time, and wished that I had drank the night before.
Right.
Ever.
Same thing for me with food, right?
When totally.
I make, like, it is, and it's just as empowering too when I can make really good choices with food and feel better because it's an act of self-love.
Absolutely.
You know, to make
self-love
a good
and
decision,
self-respect.
to make a good decision for myself and for my body that I know I'm going to be proud of. Like, that's big.
That's
huge. The
person
person I want to be.
Right.
So yeah, playing that, we call in 12-step, we say play the tape through. Play the tape through to the end because I like to play that tape through with drinking. I like to play that tape through to like the third, maybe fourth drink where everybody's laughing and it's so fun and all my anxiety has fallen away. And, you know, we're laughing and high-fiving and it's the greatest time ever, right? But I got to play it through to the end, which for me was way more drinks than 3 or 4. You know, I always say the first dozen was never too much of a problem, but that second dozen always got me in trouble.
Yeah.
But I have to play the tape all the way through to that. I can't stop thinking about, I can't stop the tape at that part where it was great fun, you know, because that's not how it ended up.
Sure. And I think that's a relative place for everyone, you know, as you, I'm sure, have experienced. It's such a personal journey. So playing that tape or finding out where that point is where it's no longer fun. Yeah. Where a good thing has gone to be a bad thing or not serving you.
Right.
Whether that is just having 2 or 3 glasses. I work with some women who are having 2 glasses of wine every night, and it's driving them crazy. They feel like alcohol has a hold on them or a control on them, and they don't want that. And then I have worked with others who have been further down the spectrum who, you know, 2 glasses is a warm up, like that's a joke.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's just so different, but yet it's all the same. Because I think it comes so much from our mindset. And for me, I was just in that detox to retox loop. That's really kind of what I call it. It was almost like this vicious Groundhog Day where I would wake up, make good intentions, have my healthy day, have my wine by night, and then wake up and repeat.
Yeah.
And, you know, wash, repeat. Little rinse in there sometimes. I would take a break. And that was the thing with me because I did not feel like I was ever at a point of physical addiction, which I know that it was going to head that way. The highway was only going one direction.
Right.
I feel blessed and grateful that I got a fairly early exit off that highway.
Yes.
But it was definitely going in a place I did not want it to go.
Yeah, because even as you described that journey for you, I mean, there are all of those things are kind of the red flags. You know, we love to take red flags and paint them white, but the truth is they're still red.
Right. In my heart of hearts.
Yeah.
And I knew God just had something else for me, something better for me. And if I would just let go, it's almost like I just hung on to it like a security blanket and like my comfort piece. And my social comfort and my comfort to connect with my husband. And there were just so many ways that I had attached it as my buddy. But it was like a friend I needed to ditch or like,
it's a toxic relationship.
A bad relationship, you know, that you've got to walk away from because at one point it was taking really more than it was giving.
Sure. And I think too, that's why it's so important to be having these exact conversations and putting that out there because who knows, if we were talking about this stuff at the level that it is talked about now, if we were having these conversations like this 10 years ago, 15 years ago, how different that picture could look for a lot of people.
A lot of people. It would have been different for me even. I felt for about 5 years, I was stuck in this detox to retox loop, alone, in silence, because I didn't necessarily fit a stereotype, which I also think is wrong as well. I think our society is very confused because we glorify alcohol. We tout it as the must-have at everything, every party, every social event. And yet when it affects our people, our own society, then that's a whole nother category. And it's just crazy making to me sometimes how we can't come in the middle and see it for what it really is.
Yeah.
As a society. To me, it's a big group issue.
It feels very odd to me that just what you're saying, like how glamorized it is to overdrink, to black out, to just display absolutely horrific, awful behavior drunk, right? And it is so socially acceptable on some level, and we laugh about it.
And all the wine memes and all the just last night
everything.
I was
It is
at
a
Target while you and I
lifestyle.
were talking, and how it's funny to buy a glass that can hold a bottle. That's not funny,
Right?
But in our society, it's a big joke until you really see that can hurt people.
Yeah,
deeply.
And it is too one of the biggest turns in that journey too is when you are actually using it to change how you feel. That's a problem, because then I'm not learning how to cope with my feelings, right? And that's
Right.
where, as addicted people, we are so kind of behind the ball when we get sober, because we haven't developed those coping skills, because we've used our substance
Mhm.
as our method of coping.
Mhm.
So we tend to be pretty immature emotionally and because we haven't developed those things. So it's one of the biggest warning signs to me is when you are using it to change how you feel in any capacity.
Right.
Instead of being comfortable or confident enough to sit in whatever you're feeling and troubleshoot and figure it out and figure other ways to make you feel better.
And what's so funny about the drink and the drinking culture is how it so subtly sneaks in. Because I was a little bit of a later in life drinker, I really had, and this is maybe shocking to people, I don't know, but just the town I grew up in, the home I grew up in, the structure I grew up in, I didn't drink throughout my 20s. I didn't start drinking until my early 30s. And I'm 47 now. I
call myself a late bloomer because I didn't start drinking really till I was 20. But
right.
in the world of addiction, that's a pretty late bloomer, because a lot of people are drinking in high school or junior high school.
Absolutely.
And I never
would
did
say
any of that.
That's probably more the norm out there. But for me, when I did start drinking, it's almost like after alcohol got introduced into my social scene where it had not been. And two, I attribute a lot of that to the society changing while I'm also getting older and growing up. So when I was in high school in the 80s, absolutely drinking was prevalent. Absolutely it was out there. But there were still enough people that weren't drinking. Seemed like in my world, or could be growing up in a conservative small town in Texas. I don't know where this is going, but, for me, there were still enough people that weren't, that it wasn't ostracizing to not.
Right.
And by the time I'm a working mother, married mother, it's everywhere. And now it's in every facet of culture, whether you're coming from a faith base or you're coming from a networking perspective. It was the same across the board. There were no more differentiators. Everyone was drinking pretty much at everything.
Yeah.
So it seemed. And so I just kind of slowly, it was like wading into picture like, the wave pool at a water park where it starts off so slow and mild, and then you get deeper and the waves start coming in. That's how drinking was for me in my life. Mm-hmm. So by the time things were teed up for me to be more stressful, alcohol had just started really becoming something that I felt like, oh, that does work temporarily. And that's where the red flags started coming in for me, because I knew what sober-minded living had felt like through the first decade of my marriage, through doing a lot of hard things. I had not had alcohol as a crutch. But I found once I hit 40, and it had become such an integral part of my time with my extended family, time with my husband, time with most of my girlfriends who will be listening to this podcast. And most of my friends still drink. Mm-hmm. And that is totally fine with me. This is my journey and just such a personal one.
Yeah.
And, but anyway, for me, it just felt like going against the current was going to be too hard because I did not have the right mindset, information, and I couldn't quite yet find my tribe of people who were in this gray area zone, who were starting to sense the red flags or that it was becoming more important than they wanted it to. Or, like I was saying, just a mental conflict, which really takes the fun out of drinking when you're in conflict about it.
Absolutely.
So finding my tribe was one thing, but really building the tribe that I wished I could have found has been another.
See, I love that too, because you did have a different set of circumstances in that you had all of those years that you hadn't drank and that you had been an adult, right? You were out in the world adulting and being married and being a mom and working and doing all of those things. So you had that sort of surplus to pull from.
Yes.
And you knew you were capable.
So thankful. And I had the contrast. I mean, I could really, truly contrast how I felt less confident actually walking in with having a drink in my hand.
Right.
From the years that I felt very confident in social settings without that drink in my hand. So I've really spent the last year and a half retraining my mind to go back to who I really am, which is being confident in my own skin, being able to walk in a room and connect with the people there because I like them, or I just want to know how they're doing and get it off of me and how I can quickly get a drink in my hand and alter my state of mind. And where's the next one?
Right.
That has totally revolutionized as an adult now, my whole social structure, because now if I'm there, I want to be there.
This is one of the hardest parts for people when they have to really get clean and sober, that started so much younger because they don't have that experience to pull from. And then your fear is, what will I do? What will my life look like? What will I even have any friends, right? Because all my friends are drinking and using people. So if I give that up, like, who am I even going to hang out with? Like, there are so many things that make that journey so frightening.
Yes.
And, you know, it's so scary to walk into it.
Yes.
Certainly as we see addiction getting younger and younger, you know, and I'm watching kids walk in to 12-step meetings at 19 and 20 years old.
Yes.
You know, like, that's hard.
Yes.
But another thing I always think about is, you know, we have so much guilt and shame in addiction. There's so much guilt and shame in that. And not only in whatever trauma I had before I ever became an alcoholic, right? But also in the course of our drinking and using life. You know, I did not make great decisions. I was so selfish and self-absorbed, and I used people, and all I wanted was to get my way. And I didn't think about how that would affect anybody else. I was so manipulative, and I just was all around not a very good person. And it's hard then to face all of that, take my substance away. I have no coping skills. You know, I got sober at 33 and a half. And I literally, emotionally, I was probably about 18, honestly.
Yeah.
So you have to face all of this stuff. And one of the things I've come to realize just in the last couple of years is I have to remember who I was before I ever had a drink, because I was a whole person. I was a whole person before I ever had a drink, and I was a phenomenal person, you know, and I was kind and generous, and I loved people, and I was so good, and I was a good daughter and a good sister and all of those things. And it's like, I have to remember that's who I am in my core.
Right.
Because we like to get stuck in thinking that who we are in our addiction is who we, oh, well, that's who I really am. But that's not who I really am at all. I was a whole human being before I ever had a drink, and that's who I am. Exactly. And I have to get back to that person. I really like that person.
I do too.
But I forget that that person is in there.
Yeah. Yeah. She's in there for all of us.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think, you know, trying to live our best life right now and just being in the present. Again, going back to mindfulness, sober-mindedness, not getting stuck in what's behind, but looking towards what's ahead and pressing on towards that goal for the price of living our best life right here, right now.
And just to be comfortable, you know, like, that's one of my favorite things being sober is that I'm so comfortable finally just in who I am. I like myself so much, and I never had that before. So that is reward enough to keep going, because it was so miserable to be uncomfortable in my own skin. That was such a miserable existence. And it's weird that we don't think about things like that when we're thinking about getting sober, and we're so scared to get sober, and what's it going to be like? Do I really want to do it? We don't think about the misery that we've lived in as a drinking person or a using person. We don't think about that misery. We just think sobriety is going to be miserable.
Right. And that's one of the biggest shockers for me.
It's totally the opposite.
It's one one of the biggest shockers for me is how much better life is without alcohol.
So much better.
I just had no idea. I was so afraid when I did quietly lay it down. Kind of my journey was last year. I was just feeling a pull and a tug to stop the war inside and lay down what had become a weight to me. And I did. I felt God saying, He'd run alongside me and say, when are you going to lay it down? I love you the same, but when are you going to lay it down? And so I finally decided, well, I don't know what this is going to look like, but I remember being with my husband downtown Fort Worth, and I looked at him and I said, cheers to you. I don't know when or how long it's going to be when I have another drink, but I'm going to be taking a break, but it's going to be a different break than I've ever taken before. I'm going to learn this time. I'm going to, again, the education piece. There's so many good podcasts and books out there. And that's really what I spent that first year doing. Annie Grace of This Naked Mind. I highly recommend her book. I've gotten so much help from her. And I could go on and on. William Porter, who wrote Alcohol Explained, is a great scientific look. And that was a piece that I was missing. I just didn't have the information, and I didn't necessarily know that there was this whole sober movement, this like sober revolution going on, where it was hitting people at all different places on the spectrum with all different solutions, with all different approaches. I had only known the black and white, all or nothing. You're a normal drinker or you're an alcoholic. And as we discussed today, it's such a spectrum.
Yeah.
And there's, like you said, if this would have been true 10, 15 years ago, that we could have had this language and this conversation going, who knows where you would have been? Who knows where I would have been? Would I have gotten as stuck as I did in my rut for those 5 years? So I think just having conversation, which is one of my passions now. Who knew? Not me.
Right.
Not me, the non-drinker in high school, college, and my 20s, that this would become something in my empty nester years that occupies my time and my heart and my mind. Who knew?
How did your husband respond?
Well, quite honestly, he probably just thought, yeah, right. We'll see. We'll see how this goes.
Well, because, this is a huge thing. And obviously, I do a lot of life coaching and recovery coaching. I have a private practice in Kansas City. And so I'm in these conversations daily, right? And this is a big thing for couples, right? I've never been married. So there are a lot of weird things about drinking and using drugs that I never experienced, right? Because I've always lived alone. I've never been married. So I didn't have to hide things or lie about things. I didn't have those situations. But I hear people talk a lot about having a fear of making that choice and really committing to being alcohol free in whatever capacity, because they're so fearful of how their spouse will respond, or the spouse being fearful of how it's going to affect their relationship. Well, if my wife or my husband decides to quit drinking, what does that mean for us socially?
Right.
What does that look like when we go out? Do we then not go out with drinking people, or are we not going to parties anymore?
Right.
Or it's a whole piece that I feel like we don't talk about enough, really.
Oh, I agree. And it is that is a conversation that I've been having a lot lately, because I do find married that it was something that we were doing together. It was a hobby. I mean, the wine tastings, the afternoons at, a live music festival with the beer. It was so engrafted in our life together as a couple. And I'll be real honest with you. And if you were sitting right here, I would tell him the same thing. It was difficult for me in those years where I was wanting to break free and maybe get out a little bit of the social circle, not the circle of people, but the circle that he and I were in with our habits.
Sure.
That's more what I mean, not the people at all. In fact, our friends are our friends today that we drank a lot with throughout those years. So I think this is huge for me, because I never ever blame my husband or anyone else around me for my choices. Like, everybody hear that?
Amen to that.
Real. I do think that our relationships influence each other. And I do think that the culture we live in is an influence. And I do think that when you're married, you're an influence on your spouse.
Sure.
And so that's part of the work. That is part of the work that I'm doing in living a wholehearted life as an individual. For myself, is teasing out and differentiating what is me and what is someone else. And being able to be honest and say, there were years where, yes, I think if I would have had a tribe or an alcohol-free spouse, it would have been easier for me to lay it down. Yes, there's no question it would have been.
Sure.
But I also wouldn't have the journey that I have and the passion that I have today for the conversation had I not had to wrestle with it so intrinsically and so on my own.
I relate to so much of this because I would say the same thing about my friends, like my very closest friends. There were, listen, I drank for a lot of years that I definitely drank alcoholically, but I wasn't having any consequences, right? It wasn't ruining my life. It wasn't anything. I had a lot of fun for a long time. The last 3 years of my drinking got very ugly. And I would say probably at least the last one, maybe 1.5 before I quit drinking, the last 1.5 years maybe, I really knew inside I was exhausted. I really wanted to step away from it. But same thing, a lot like what you're saying, it was so ingrained in me. It was so much my lifestyle. And I worked in bars, by the way. I was a bartender. So it was legitimately my lifestyle,
Right.
But even like when I would have a night off from work, I remember so many times, like I'd be so hungover from drinking all night the night before, working drunk, staying up the rest of the night drinking, sleeping most of the day, right? And I would be so hungover and I would feel so crappy. And here would come my friends ready to have a night of drinking. And it was this thing where so many times I had that inner turmoil, like you were talking about too, where it was just like, oh my gosh, I would love to just stay home and go to bed. But I almost felt obligated to get drunk with my friends because that's what they wanted to do. And that's what they counted on me to do because that's what I did.
Right.
So I relate to so much of that where maybe if I didn't have so much of that, it would have been a little easier for me to break free a little sooner. I don't know. Of course, our path is exactly what our path is supposed to be. And everything turned out beautifully without, me trying to make all those decisions.
Right, right. Well, I think with our spouse or our family or our friends, we can long for them to change. We can hope maybe that there's a change, but we can't expect a change. It can't be an expectation or have anything to do with our own journey of health, healing, and just being our best. But yeah, it's a huge issue. It's a really big issue, married and just as a couple.
So tell us about Sober Sis.
Well, Sober Sis was literally born in this house, sitting by the fireplace on Christmas Day of 2017. My husband and I were sitting around and I just said to my husband, babe, it's been such an amazing year. We were reflecting on the year 2017 and it was in April that I had decided to take my break and it had extended all the way to December.
Right.
Intentionally, yes, but really I did not know that I would really adopt an alcohol-free lifestyle. It's what I wished would happen. It's what I desired, but I really didn't know if it would. So by Christmas, I had really been through so many social events, weddings, anniversary, my birthday, Mother's Day, where I was also given a free bottle of champagne and turned it down. And I paid for it from where we went to lunch, basically. So I'd been through all these huge milestones where I had made a conscious effort to really evaluate, do I want to drink right now? Does alcohol serve me right now? And every time it came up, no. In fact, I think I want to keep going because I'm gaining momentum in how I'm feeling. So by the time Christmas rolled around, I was like, wow. And the holidays just made it through that. In fact, I didn't just make it through where I felt like I was surviving miserably. I was actually thriving.
Yeah.
And feeling like, oh my gosh, this has been really one of the best years of my life in a long time. And I'm fully present with my husband, my children. I'm never missing anything because I'm kind of numbed out to the world.
Right.
I'm just super aware and acute. And sometimes that's hard too. Don't let me paint the picture that it's always great to be acutely aware of everything. Yeah. But anyway, so by Christmas, I just was sitting around the fire and I told my husband, I said, I just wish that more people knew what I knew. I wish that my friends, I wish that my girlfriends, I wish that women had some of the very tools that I have that have helped me so much. And again, a lot of that was, there's different programs out there online. I probably listened at that point to 300 podcasts, read 15 books. I was just full, bursting with information and life change, but yet I didn't really know what to do with it. So that's when Sober Sis came into play. And we named it as Sober-Minded Sisters. And I really named it Sober-Minded Sisters in Christ. Now, I am not excluding anyone if they don't feel like all that fits for them. But I will say a sober-minded sister is anyone who wants to explore sober-minded living. So I came up with Sober Sis. We got the URL for it. I couldn't believe that it was available, quite honestly, with all the sober names out there on Instagram and everything that's going on. But it must have been a God thing because it was saved for me. And long story short, put together some emails of the best of what I had read and found with my own story mixed in and a biblical point of view without being rule-oriented, legalistic, or anything to do with religion. I was coming more from even the Bible verse that says we're called to be sober-minded. There's an enemy out there that wants to take us down. So what does that mean? Does that mean actual alcohol-free living? I don't know. I don't think so. I think it means sober-mindedness, which comes from a personal conviction per person. But if you're on a sober-minded journey, it's going to be very clear, I think, what that is for you, So anyway, long story short, it's been a crazy 8 months since Sober Sis started. I started by inviting, kind of like you said with your podcast, you've got to start from somewhere.
Right.
And I just started by inviting my friends to basically read the emails that I'd put together, giving them all my tips, tricks, tools. I broke it down into different categories of even how to relate to a spouse that's drinking, or what do you do in your social network if everyone's drinking. In fact, I've got a great list of kind of the topics that I cover. And so I started an Instagram in March of this year at Sober Sis, and slowly but surely through social media and just the power of story and putting yourself out there, women started finding me, and they started finding this 21-day reset. So to this date, there's been over 150 women from around the world in about 6 different countries, about 15 different states, who have signed up to go through this 21-day reset. And I call it a reset because at the end of the 21 days, it's up to you what you do with the information. Sure. The reset is basically everything I learned in my year of living alcohol-free. And so I put that together, and now Sober Sis has grown, and I'm now offering a Survive the 5 guide. So for some people, the 21-day reset is maybe even more than they're wanting to bite off and chew.
Sure.
Maybe they're wanting to take, and this is for women, but maybe they're wanting to take more of a baby step. And again, I relate really well with gray area drinkers, women that are kind of caught in the detox to retox cycle. That's my game. I understand it very well.
Right.
And so if someone's just feeling like they can imagine going to a wedding or an event, or it's a Tuesday night and a storm's rolling in, and they couldn't imagine not opening a bottle of wine, but they want to make a change, I have what I've called the Survive the 5 guide, which are my top 4 or 5 tricks and tips for surviving even one night. When I say surviving, really thriving during that time with some new tools.
Right.
So many times, don't you think, we end up where we want to make a change, but we do everything the same?
Yeah.
And then expect different results.
Yeah.
I think there's a name for that.
Yes. Yes,
and
there
so,
is.
Yes. And so this is kind of where it's at right now. So Sober Sis started out, talk about grassroots. It is still grassroots, actually.
Isn't it cool when you realize that people are consuming your material like in other countries?
Yes.
Like, it's amazing to me when I look at like my podcast statistics and I see all the people in other countries. I'm like, wow, that's
crazy.
So cool. Yeah, I love that.
And because of technology today, it's one click away to get the resource and the help and the tribe people need anywhere they are.
Anywhere, that's right. So this is really interesting too. It's so timely because when just yesterday I listened to the book because I listen to books more than I read. It just allows me to consume more. But I listened to Girl, Wash Your Face. Have you heard about this book?
I have. It was just my book club book this month at my house, in fact.
Nice. So how amazing. I was just listening to the very end, right? She had it at the very end, this whole chapter about drinking.
She sure did.
And it's the same thing, like everything we've been talking about today. And I was like, gosh, I just love this.
I love where she's coming from.
Yes. And I love that people are in this place where they're getting a grasp on it earlier and not having to end up like where I ended up, right?
Sure.
Which is, my final thing that got me sober is I crashed my car at 70 miles an hour. Wow. I was unconscious.
Wow.
And I hit another car.
Wow.
I mean, it was a horrible, frightening moment. And not everybody has to get there.
Right.
And I had already had a ton of legal trouble. I went to jail. Like none of that stopped me. But I love that there's this whole thing now where people are really figuring it out much earlier and just making a choice to have better lives.
Yes. Oh man, that's my heartbeat right now is, like let's say it's a scale of 1 to 10. What if we could talk at a 2 or a 3 or a 4? Like you said, exactly, without the pain and suffering that you had to suffer to really get to the point to find the help you needed. And what if we could just open the conversation? I think that's what I wanted all along.
Yeah.
Was a conversation where I could talk out loud, wrestle with it out loud, without judgment, without shame, without rules, and without labels.
Yeah.
If I could just explore it and even go back and forth with it a little bit, but wrestle with it out loud instead of in silence or isolation, because I thought that surely I was the only one, which is funny to me now, knowing what I know and knowing the tribe that's out there and just the movement itself, how normal and actually mainstream my experience was. And in fact, it's so mainstream that it's just a matter of time if the culture doesn't begin to change, which I think it is. Mm-hmm. I do think the culture's waking up and changing. I mean, it's just, I could go into the things that just blow my mind that 15, 20 years ago, we would have never have seen. For example, at some of our local grocery stores, you can get a glass of wine or a glass of beer and put it in your shopping cart and shop the store and then put it at a drink station receptor at the end of an aisle away.
Oh my goodness.
There are 2 stores here in Fort Worth that you can drink and shop and it'd be totally socially acceptable. That would have not even been true 10 years ago.
Right.
So as the tide is changing towards an alcohol-centric society, I also think people are waking up to the damage, to the pain, to the hurt, to just the health suffering. There's a hashtag floating around out there, which I love and I use all the time, called Sober for the Health of It.
Yeah, I love that too.
Where people can just choose to just, like you said, talk about it sooner, make the changes sooner with support.
Yeah.
Versus being on your own and then waiting to get support when there's finally a crisis.
Yeah. I love all of this stuff. I'm so happy for you. And I'm so grateful that I got to meet you and spend this time with you. Thank you so much for doing this podcast with me. Last question. I think we kind of talked about it a little bit already, but what is your favorite thing? And I'm going to rephrase it a little bit to be more appropriate to you. What is your favorite thing about being a sober-minded person?
Oh, I like that. I think just the clarity and the consistency. I love that I've got a clear mind 24/7. Yeah. I'm never in and out of pre-drinking, drinking, after drinking, the hangover, the recovery from the hangover, the getting back up, the drinking again. It was such a roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
And I think I just love that is so level now. It's clear-minded, consistent in my mind. Yes, hard things come. Things are chaotic outside of me, but there's something in my mind that remains more stable than it ever has before.
I love that. Yeah, that's so good. Thank you again for doing this with me. I hope that we get to collaborate and do some fun things together in the future because I really appreciate what you're doing. I think it's so needed.
Well, thank you. It's been a journey for me and just a lot of fun, actually. I think being sober or living alcohol-free can be fun. And I kind of just want to put a different spin on it and say, you can do it because it feels good. You can do it because you want to.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of opportunity out there.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jenn.
Thanks.
You've reached the end of another great episode of the Addiction Unlimited podcast. Candid and honest conversation about addiction and recovery. Be sure to visit us at addictionunlimited.com to join the conversation and access show notes and links to everything we talked about. Love this episode? Please take 30 seconds to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes to help us improve and give you the information you want. Thanks for listening. See you next week.